Well, this is about being out of control. And although we're going to talk about being out of control today, there's another aspect to it. It's how we respond to it with grace, with humor, with something else. So who among us have ever heard of the Sumerians and the Sumerian civilization? I suspect a few of us, perhaps more than a few. Pretty good for a civilization that began over 6,000 years ago and lasted over 2,000 years. Harriet and I were watching a documentary about them the other day, and I want to tell you about a part of their story that really caught my attention. According to the narrator, their civilization began to grow because of abundant water from the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, which they used to irrigate the desert landscape in which they lived. It was also because of a particular kind of grass with wheat-like grains called spelt that grew wild there. It's still around. Check the ingredients on your granola. Anyway, they began to cultivate it and eventually grew great fields of it in the desert, watered by the rivers. The culture grew and flourished, and writing and art, lore flourished. Huge buildings were built as well. The civilization lasted for a long, long time. But what got me was what happened at the end of the mighty Sumerian civilization. Two things, according to the documentary. First, the irrigation eventually left too many salts on the soil, making it unusable for growing anything. And second, the Iron Age began, and their region had no sources of iron ore. The Sumerians were left behind by those regions that did. That was it. The mighty Sumerians. I had to ask myself, why did I find this story so remarkable, even unsettling? It was because it seemed to take so little, a couple of unremarkable, seemingly innocuous facts of happenstance, to turn their mightiness to ancient history. It made me appreciate once again how much of our stories are written by elements out of our control. We are our physical makeup, our genetics, our bodies, inherited diseases, as well as our cultures, religions, and beliefs. We're shaped by our homes, our neighborhoods, schools, and government. All these play a part in making us who we are today. How we think, and how we see, and how we understand the world. We had no part in choosing them. Let's call those things the givens. All these many factors that, without any input on our part, have shaped us, given us the story, the identity of who we are. All these are the givens of our lives. And it isn't simply that the factual details of our lives are given, but also that the factual events of our lives follow the same laws of cause and effect as the rest of the universe. We come to realize at a young age that life is not fair. Things take place or not regardless of what we consider fair or just or balanced. The relentless logic of our world also governs the movements of the planets, the biology of our bodies, the cycles of life and death. The laws of nature aren't concerned with what we think or feel. So much of this world is given, and our stories are given. But that isn't everything, is it? From a very early age, we start to write our part of the story. It's this part, the part that we write, that I had hoped to focus on in this service. What is it about us that lets us, or in some cases, forces us to break through at least some of the givens in our life, to create what is ours in a unique and personal way? What is it that we bring to our story that is not already predetermined by the givens? Where does that freedom come from, that creativity, that courage and sense of right and wrong, of knowing what we must do? Where does that come from? Answering these questions was what I intended when I started writing this sermon. After days of trying, I had to come to the conclusion that perhaps the topic is just too big for me. Any observation that I had soon multiplied into a million others, like a reflection in a house of mirrors at an amusement park. There you are, but looking in another direction. Or there you are, receding into an infinity of images. How could I even begin to say anything that captures the fullness and the mystery? For that matter, how can I talk about one person's story without including that one story is intimately connected to 100 other stories of 1,000 other people, each one shaping and moving the others? We're all connected, both in the present moment as well as through time with our ancestors. So let's keep to one question. Where in us is the freedom to write our story? I'll suggest one simple answer, what I call a human spirit. I'll simply speak about how I understand human spirit this morning. Two small words pointing to a vast churning ocean of energy, joy, grief, love, anger, courage, compassion, and on and on. How can we say anything that includes all of this? But I'd like to try this. I'd like to point out what has seemed to me throughout my life to be a few general qualities of the human spirit. When faced with that tremendous gift, that infinitely beautiful and infinitely frustrating experience that we call a life. What is it that I'm calling human spirit? It's also called by many other names that you will recognize. The holy, truth, beauty, and justice, the spirit of life, life itself, God, the Christ, Buddha nature, the sacred, the depths of being, the foundation of all that is, and the list goes on. No doubt there are multiple other names arising in the thoughts of this congregation, seeing as how this is a UU gathering. Today, I'm going to call it human spirit. Perhaps because beautiful, impenetrable mystery of life is just too hard to say multiple times. It's true that even among ourselves, there are many names, but not only names, but beliefs. I want to suggest to you today, however, That if we look at that aspect of life which leads and guides and supports the living out of our story in the face of all the givens of our lives, we can find that there is some commonality of experience underlying all those names and beliefs. First, there is something about human spirit that is other than simply ourselves. It is not an object, not something easily pointed to in the world at large. It is always somewhat beyond what we can grasp. It is, in some strange sense, there and not there at the same time. It is good. For some of us, it is more than good. It is the source and beginning of all goodness itself. It is something that we can call upon or search for or rely on or even rest within. But here again, as the saying goes, there are many paths up that mountain. Second, it is ungraspable. It isn't a thing that can be easily named or understood. Neither can it be used or manipulated. We need it and depend on it and are lost without it. Perhaps the primary example of this for me, my own Christian upbringing, is the image of Jesus of Nazareth pursuing a story of love, even through suffering and death. He followed that path with integrity, regardless of how excruciatingly difficult that path was. In his example, he showed us what it might mean when we insist on writing our story from the deepest depths of our spirit, regardless of consequences. And yet, what happened? One part of that story that has always moved me is that as he hung dying, he called out, "Father, why have you abandoned me?" We need spirit. We depend on it. We're lost without it. Third, human spirit, that part of us that responds to the givens of our life, requires something from us. It demands response, action, connection, relationship, attention. When you think of it, these are normally requirements that are called for in a relationship. There is something within our being, or even more, there is something that permeates every aspect of our lives, our stories, that calls for our attention, our acknowledgement, and our action. We are called not simply to act, but to act in certain ways, with a particular turn of the heart, or to address what is placed before us. And if our heart, does not normally shine with the love and compassion that lies at the core of the human spirit, then we are called upon to reach within and bring it out. The story that comes to mind for me here is that of John Lewis on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Just before he began his walk into a frightening array of police force, a walk that could very well have ended his life. I have imagined what I might have thought and felt and done if I was there. It's a painful thought for me. Finally, I'd like to try to name something else which is difficult to describe, at least for me. But I don't see how we can account for how we write our stories without mentioning it. That is the resistance we experience within ourselves. When we set about doing or learning something, or have decided that a course of action would be in our best interest. And yet, when we begin doing that, we encounter great resistance in ourselves. Is that not so? For example, we try to meditate or to make some other change for the better in our life and find that as we make progress, things arise within us, making it more and more difficult. Is there something about living our story that always includes this resistance? It seems so to me. And if that is true, then perhaps it would be good to look at it full in the face. The struggle that happens when we try to move forward towards what seems good is something that some would call the problem of evil. Others might say that is the human ego. Others would call it greed or hatred, ignorance. But if we are trying to describe how our stories are created, I don't know how we can fail to mention this experience in our lives. Not everyone knows the story of the resistance that the Buddha encountered when he resolved to sit down in meditation until he found enlightenment. As the story is told, he was tested for a long time by a demon called Mara, who sent an army of demons to torment him or try to seduce him. In my experience, at least, this is a common experience, that of having to deal with an internal resistance in our pursuit of the good in our stories. So let's stop and take inventory of what we're talking about here. Our human history is full of the wisdom and insight of countless generations of people. And all, it seems to me, address themselves to how we step forward, how we play the hand we are dealt. And they all, in my view, point to an unstoppable exuberance of life, of presence, of service, of justice. That is not all. Do they not all include the idea that this is not easy, that it is work, sometimes done in darkness and uncertainty? I believe that one of our deepest delights and joys is to realize that while most of our lives are out of our control, we do have choices. We can face the incredibly difficult task of learning how to live deeply and well. This, then, is the core message of this sermon. It is here in human spirit, in the beautiful, impenetrable mystery, that we find our true story and our truest identity. So may it be so.